Gentlemen, before we begin today's session, I want to talk about the invisible expectations that shaped you, long before you were old enough to understand them. Every boy is born with a full range of human emotions. Joy, sadness, love, fear, tenderness, frustration, embarrassment, even excitement. But as boys grow, those feelings don't go away. They just get buried because we're taught to hide them. From a young age, most of us heard messages like, don't cry, be tough, handle it, suck it up, man up, don't let anyone disrespect you. And buried under all those messages is one loud, unspoken rule: real men don't feel. And if they do, they sure as hell don't show it. We're taught to shove fear, sadness, and vulnerability so far down that eventually all we're left with is one emotion we're allowed to express: anger. That's the one feeling men can show without being judged. And too often, it's the one we don't know how to manage. The documentary, The Mask You Live In, which we'll watch this evening, explores how boys are socialized to suppress who they really are and to perform a version of masculinity that rewards dominance and punishes vulnerability. It shows how this emotional mask not only isolates men, but leads to depression, addiction, violence, and broken relationships. The movie asks some pretty powerful questions. What happens to boys who are never allowed to cry? What happens when love and connection are seen as weakness, but aggression and control are seen as strength? What kind of man do you want to become when you've been wearing a mask your whole life? If you've spent most of your life pretending you're fine when really you're not, this session is for you. If no one taught you how to sit with fear, disappointment, or grief, and the only emotion you were ever allowed to express was anger, then what you learned wasn't emotional strength. It was emotional suppression. So tonight, we start with anger, not just how it shows up when it explodes, but where it comes from, what it's trying to tell us, and how we can respond without causing harm. We're gonna take a hard look at anger, and anger is not the problem. Not just what it looks like when it explodes, but where it comes from, what it's trying to tell us, and how we can respond to it without causing harm. That message is clear. Anger is not itself the problem. The real issue is how we proceed to respond to it. Anger is a biological signal, just like hunger or pain. It tells us when something feels wrong or unfair. But, too often, many men confuse having anger with having the right to hurt, punish, or control somebody else. And that's confusion. That is where the violence starts. So let me say it again. Anger is allowed. Violence is not. You're allowed to feel angry. You're not allowed to use anger as a weapon. We talk about emotional intelligence, knowing what you're really feeling. One of the most important skills we work on in this group is something called emotional intelligence, the ability to recognize, name, and manage your emotions. Most of us weren't taught that as boys. We were taught to stuff emotions down, power through, or lash out. But here's the truth. Anger is often just a mask, covering something deeper like fear, shame, guilt, loneliness, embarrassment, jealousy, or insecurity. For example, let's say your partner says something critical about your parenting. You feel a flash of rage and you start yelling, "You don't get to tell me how to raise my kid." But if we hit pause and go underneath the anger, we might find shame. Maybe deep down, you're scared she's right. Maybe you're afraid you're not doing enough. That's the real emotion. That's the wound that anger is trying to protect. Emotional intelligence is about slowing down enough to say, I'm angry, but why? What was the trigger? What am I feeling underneath the surface? When you build that awareness, you gain control, because you can't change what you're not willing to see. And emotional sobriety, I call this good. Choosing calm in the middle of chaos. We talk a lot about it and explore. You've heard of physical sobriety. staying away from alcohol and drugs. Emotional sobriety, however, is just as powerful. It means staying present, grounded, and nonviolent, even when you're triggered. So let me give you an example from a past participant. He told me that when he feels disrespected, his whole body gets tight, his chest locks up, his voice gets louder, and he feels like he has to win the argument. Before Explore, he thought that was strength. But what he learned is that true strength means walking away before you explode and breathing through it instead. Naming what you're feeling, choosing not to destroy the people you love. So, you might be asking, how does emotional sobriety work in real life? Let's say you come home and your partner's short with you. She's clearly pissed. You feel the surge start. What's her problem now? But instead of reacting, you do the work. You breathe. You check your body for tension. You recognize the story you're telling yourself. Maybe she's always mad at me. You change the story. Maybe she had a rough day. Maybe this isn't about me. And this time, you choose not to escalate. That is emotional sobriety. That is self-regulation. And that, my friends, is the beginning of change. So, change is hard, but it's possible. And we try to teach you what's called the growth mindset. That means believing your behavior, your patterns, and your reactions can change. Only if you put in the effort. Some of you came in here thinking, I've always been like this. This is just how I was raised. It's too late for me to change. But those are fixed mindset thoughts. And they keep you stuck in the same cycles of anger and abuse. The growth mindset says, you know what? I'm not perfect, but I'm working on it. It says I messed up before, but I can learn to respond differently. It takes time, but I'm not giving up. Let me give you an example of how this plays out in real life. Let's say your pattern used to be shouting, slamming doors, calling her names, then apologizing the next day, right? That's fixed behavior. But, now you're in a group. You're learning tools. You feel yourself starting to escalate. And this time, you take a time out. You leave the room. You breathe. You come back later and say, I was getting worked up. I took a break because I didn't want to say something I'd regret. That's growth. That's what real change looks like. In the moment when it matters. That's a man who's choosing accountability over aggression. So, remember, if I could wrap it up before we watch the film, anger is not the enemy. It's a signal. But if we don't understand it, if we don't learn to recognize our real feelings, manage our emotions, and most importantly, believe we can grow, we'll keep repeating the same patterns. The mask you were handed doesn't have to define you. You can take it off. You can speak the truth underneath it. You can learn to feel without losing control. Emotional intelligence is the awareness. Emotional sobriety is the control. The growth mindset is the belief that you can get better. You don't have to be the man you were last year or even last week. You just have to take the next right step today. So we're going to talk about this film after we watch a portion of it. I've got a variety of different questions I'd like to ask you. So I'd like you to take a look at the film and think about how it applies to you. And then we'll finish up tonight with some questions. Keep in mind that I'm going to be in, I think I'll be back. I'm going to be in Cancun starting tomorrow night. But in fact, I will be back for group next week. So looking forward to seeing you guys. And let's enjoy the film.